Now, before we get to the rest of the video, that was almost entirely clickbait. Wait. Please hear me out. I don't think anyone is inherently racist, although I think the idea of familiarity bias towards race is possible. I also don't think that would cause anyone to be racist purely from lack of familiarity. I also believe that a specific ethnic group or race cannot be inherently racist than another, and I think to say otherwise might indicate that you have some prejudices of your own. There are some on the left who believe that firstly, either just black people or people of color can't be racist, or alternatively, that white people are racist, or both. Now, I'm hesitant to say some, because that might be a large generalization, but I've seen an array of videos that suggest that it is something that at least some leftists believe, and it is coming more and more in the mainstream media. So far, I haven't seen any conservative mediums maintain this belief, although there might be some. Some of you are already about to exit out of my video. That's okay, but I'd ask you to stay, because if you're upset by the notion that I think all people of groups initially start with the exact same moral character, then I think it would be healthy for you to stay and listen. And I'm not trying to be facetious, I'm just being honest. I know that not all people who oppose your views are worth listening to. There are many people on the left and right side of the aisle that have no idea what is happening in current political and social issues and just spout the same crap all the time. I understand that frustration because I've seen it happen on both sides when I'm argued for certain beliefs that I have. I'd also like to point out that everyone you and I both know will disagree on something, so to invalidate other possible videos I make based off this one wouldn't be fair, because you could disagree with me in this video, but the next video I make you might agree with. The idea that someone can be unbiased is flawed, but the endeavor to be unbiased is my main goal. I want to primarily convince you with facts and reason, although again, I can't completely say, in all honesty, that my emotions won't get the best of me. Humans are fallible, and especially for this topic, opinion has a lot to do with the main argument, as there's a difference in opinion of the definition. So, now that we've gotten that all out of the way, let's start with which author or commentator has said these things and why. And primarily I have articles, but I also have some videos of people claiming that it's impossible to be racist to a white person, or that white people are the only people that can be racist.
I wouldn't say that I'm racist, nor I'm capable of it.
Didn't anyone tell you black people cannot be racist?
Black people can't be racist.
And why is that?
Racism is an institutionalized thing. I don't think black people have set up institutions powerful enough to oppress other people.
I think I can be prejudiced, but I'm not racist.
I'm prejudiced.
I feel like I'm biased when it comes to white people, honestly, because I don't tend to give them the benefit of the doubt because they come into this world with so much privilege, and I need to work on that.
All white people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human, like that actually, instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons. So in this particular way, white people are all racist. So
you say that all whites are racist. Can you expound on that, please?
Any white person who was born, raised, and schooled in the United States of America, if you aren't a racist, you're a miracle.
Yeah, I'm racist because I'm a white person. I think all white people are racist.
We have just been put into this system designed to empower our white privilege. As a white person, I am super racist.
I know a lot of people like to say, yes, I'm a racist, because that makes them feel like people know that I'm admitting my faults, but I think that's a weird cop-out.
So let's go into the first article, which is by Vice. And Vice says, "Dear white people, please stop pretending reverse racism is real. It's literally impossible to be racist to a white person. And before going into their statistics, they talk about a personal anecdote where they were talking with one of their colleagues, another journalist who she mentions is white and male, and because of this disagrees with her. That the journalist she was talking to felt that his job was being encroached upon or would be encroached upon by a person of color. And she doesn't really talk specifics, very general sort of anecdote, but I'm just telling you what happens. But then she does go into the statistic here. According to a survey released last year, 52% of white Americans said that they believe discrimination against them is on par with discrimination faced by black people and other minorities. In Canada, a poll taken in 2014 showed that most Canadians don't think they're racist. 84% claim that they have friends of different racial backgrounds, but 32% make occasional racist comments, and 27% agree with racial stereotypes. Those ideas are at odds with each other, demonstrating a lack of understanding of the basic concept of racism. I think one major problem that the argument she presents is that the races of the people sampled were not disclosed. And Canada, although I assume it to be majority white, isn't all white. So I find it improbable that these were only views presented by white people. I keep finding different articles all talking about the same thing, which is why I'm taking one example because they all make the same point in every article. Let me read you some of the titles. So Elite Daily says, "Dear white people, why black people can't be racist?" Then you have HuffPost saying, "Can black people be racist?" Hello Giggle says that racism against white people doesn't exist in America, and here's why it never will. Another HuffPost article says that reverse racism isn't. And lastly, pambazumba.org. For a little bit of background, Pambazumba is an organization focused on equality for human rights, but they're most notably based in Africa. And this article says that black people can't be racist, even with the rampant colorism that happens in Africa right now.
There's definitely a colorism issue going on where darker skinned people are usually looked at differently than lighter skinned people.
And I'd like to point out that there's quite a chunk of evidence of colorism, that colorism actually occurred much before the transatlantic slave trade, which is what a lot of people try and point to. But I think a main problem with that theory is that colorism existed in a lot of other cultures as well, especially Asian cultures, especially with Southern Asian cultures. So I don't think that the transatlantic slave trade is the pure reason for why colorism is still happening all across Africa. I think a lot of it had to do with African tribes and the discriminations they had against each other. Anyway, the argument that nearly every single one of these sources make is that black people or POC can't be racist, but they can be prejudiced. Now, I don't understand why anyone believes this definition, but I assume it's from people who write these articles and for the people that have made an entirely different definition to validate their argument. It has been repeated over and over, and now this definition has gained a good bit of following. And you see it in articles on YouTube, in television.
The role of counterculture is to wake up the mainstream.
I have furniture older than you. Counterculture? Is that what you think this is? Your little show?
What about my show?
The show is racist.
Black people can't be racist. Prejudice, yes, but not racist. Racism describes a system of disadvantage based on race. Black people can't be racist since we don't stand to benefit from such a system.
I believe that racism is inherent in every race. There's also the idea of implicit bias, popularized by the IAT, Harvard's implicit bias test, but I believe that requires an entire other video. So, the obvious counter-argument to the authors is that all ethnic groups are racist, which means that it most likely doesn't have a large difference in percentage to any other race. Unfortunately, Miss Krishnan doesn't have the same sentiments. Let's keep going. She quotes a man who is an influential lawyer in the city of Toronto by the name of Anthony Morgan. He was named one of the top 25 influential lawyers by Canadian Lawyer magazine. Personally, I see no relation between him and the topic at hand, being that he's a lawyer and, although an anti-racist, doesn't have much insight to offer, unlike another journalist or political pundit would. She quotes him saying, "Simply put, Morgan said reverse racism doesn't exist, and a person who claims otherwise is, quote, outing themselves as someone who has little to no experience or knowledge of what racism is," end quote. Now this comes to another point that I'm happy she brought up, because the idea of reverse racism existing is incredibly nonsensical. I mean, seriously, why did someone say that it's reverse racism? It's called racism. Regardless of color, it's just racism. How could it ever be reverse? And then while I'm reading the first article, Vice gives me a link to another article, and I decide to read it. And it talks about white people and telling the author why they feel oppressed. And some white people even believe that they are the primary victims of racism. The author talks about, firstly, talks about how all white people are oblivious and that they are ostriches with their head in the ground, which is a new insult for me. The main idea of the article is trying to find out why white people feel as though they are oppressed currently, but the only problem is he didn't have any words from a white person in the entire article. It seems as if he, 1, made vast generalizations about the people he asked, or 2, made them up on the spot himself. These are the apparent problems that white people have nowadays, and this is why they're upset. The first one is, isn't whiteness less valuable now? And the second one is whiteness ending? Personally, I've never heard these complaints, but maybe it's because I don't exactly agree or know about them? I don't really know. And I also don't really know that whites are oppressed. I feel as though that's a strong word. One thing that the article does address correctly, though, is the statement or phrase of, "I don't see color," or "I'm colorblind."
It means that I believe in my First Amendment rights to criticize him. So it doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me a racist to point out. I mean, I've never used racial slurs to address people. I've never looked down on someone because of their skin color. To me, true diversity is diversity of thought, not diversity of color. I don't see color. I go after Hillary Clinton and she's white as they come.
You don't see color. So what do you do at a traffic lights? I don't believe in that at all.
You aren't. What? You're not colorblind. There are serious differences between every race, and pretending as if they don't matter is a large mistake. It's a misguided effort to make yourself feel better, as well as your inner circle, and when you say it to someone else, you sound incredibly ignorant. Moving on, the author of the first article gives more quotes of Anthony, where he says, "Racism is based on a couple of things: historical, systemic oppression, and power. And as far as history goes, white people have never been persecuted for the color of their skin, so there's no point comparing their experiences to those of black, brown, and indigenous folks. Now, it's upsetting that a lawyer, one who seems and should be highly educated, can make such an outrageous statement such as that one that has been disproved, and although there is certainly a good example of whites being enslaved for their skin, and I can make a separate video about that, let's go to a current form of oppression experienced by some whites every day. First, you have to visit South Africa. In South Africa, after the apartheid, now let me clarify, the apartheid was in no way justified, and I don't condone any of the resentments that they had, but the problem has seemingly reversed itself. People have turned extremely violent towards white South Africans, which doesn't make sense because, as many of these articles say, inheriting a higher socioeconomic status should indicate that you couldn't be discriminated against. Except they are, in large quantities. From Wikipedia, Democratic Alliance MP Gwen Nuenya has accused South Africans of hypocrisy and dishonesty of treating black South Africans as the victims, noting that racism aimed at white people elicits little reaction from the populace. A comparative study by trade union Solidarity confirmed that South African media give more attention to white on black racism. It also found that the South African Human Rights Commission is much more likely to self-initiate investigations into white-on-black racism and is more lenient in cases of black-on-white racism. The FWD Clark Foundation in 2016 claimed that black South Africans are far more violent and racist towards their white counterparts, and vice versa, and appealed to the South African Human Rights Commission to intervene on the issue of racism and hate speech against white South Africans. Its complaint to the commission detailed 45 social media postings that incite extreme violence against white South Africans. The foundation also said an analysis of Facebook and Twitter messages shows that by far the most virulent and dangerous racism, expressed in the most extreme and violent language, has come from disaffected black South Africans. The messages are replete with threats to kill all whites, including children, to rape white women, or expel all whites from South Africa. These kinds of incidents are explicit racism. This kind of racism cannot be denied, and for these people to not have any knowledge of these occurrences is quite sad. I confess that I am incredibly exhausted by this pretentious persona that this author seems to constantly employ, but let's keep going. She brings up multiple instances of white people being kept out of certain spaces or being moved to somewhere based on their race. Some journalists were removed from meetings because they were white, and one was refused service at a BLM movement because he was white. They wouldn't sell him a shirt. Now, I think that they have the right to refuse service to him. They're allowed to do that. But to also say that it isn't racism would be wrong. For instance, there was commotion a few years ago about how a bakery refused service to a gay couple who wanted a wedding cake. The bakery refused service. They are certainly allowed to do that. Now, do they think gay people shouldn't be married? I don't know. Probably. Do you think that they might be homophobes? I don't know. Probably. The author gives us some final remarks with the lawyer's quotes again. If your default reaction to these discussions is to see white people as victims of reverse racism, Morgan has some advice. Educate yourself. Quote, anybody who would want to use or identify something as reverse racist, I would strongly encourage them to stop for a moment and really think seriously about the last time they really have taken the time to study or get a deep understanding of what racism is and how it impacts different communities. Firstly, I know it's become extremely common to say, educate yourself, etc. For anyone's information in any political stance ever, that's extremely bratty. I don't know where anyone had this unwarranted claim to believe that they were automatically entitled to the thought that they were more informed about a subject than someone else, but it did happen. Also, I'd like to point out that anyone who says this also disenfranchises their arguments, because you want people to agree with you, right? That's not going to make them agree with you. Secondly, and most importantly, racism impacts all communities. Regardless if there is a disparity between the amount it impacts certain communities is irrelevant. That isn't an argument to it actually occurring between individuals. Now let's go to some documents and statistics that do agree with me. First, statistics. 37% of American adults think most black Americans are racist, according to a new Rasmussen Reports National Telephone Survey. Just 15% consider most white Americans racist, while 18% say the same of most Hispanic Americans. Among black Americans, 31% think most blacks are racist, while 24% consider most whites racist, and 15% view most Hispanics that way. Among white adults, 10% think most white Americans are racist, 38% believe most blacks are racist, and 17% say most Hispanics are racist. Now, I also have some articles, ironically, but by mostly left news sources. These articles seem to be a bit of a rebuttal, as many articles I had previously looked at regarding the inability for blacks to be racist were published prior to many of the articles that I'm going to talk about now. From the Odyssey Online, the author says, most people hold the belief that only white people can be racist. This belief is quite hostile and comes off as, well, racist to onlookers of said race. If people were asked how they would feel if they were thought of in a negative manner just because of the color of their skin, all people would respond in the same way, that they would be offended. Why? Because regardless of skin color, it hurts to be categorized, to be seen just as the color of your skin, and to be judged solely based on that attribute. Why then is it okay for people of other races to continuously group the white race together for having this mentality, especially when there are many people, many white people, who speak out against the injustices done against the people of all colors? The main issue for all people regarding the debate on racism is that most people disagree on the definition of racism. I, like many others, are focusing on the views of individual racism. You can find tons of videos about blacks discriminating against whites, whites discriminating against Asians, Asians discriminating against Hispanics, and the Hispanics discriminating against blacks. They are all acts of racism. Individual racism has nothing to do with the government or society but the individual. And the allowance for cradling of malice for someone of another race is a despicable concept. An article by the Stanford Daily delves even further into the topic, with regard to scholarly writing pertaining to the disagreement of racism and whom it should be employed upon. Quote, reading a scholarly paper that begins with the definition that racism equals prejudice plus power, and concludes that only whites can be racist, is, to say the least, an interesting intellectual exercise. After reading many of these papers, it seems as if these scholars commit the flaw of circular reasoning. They assume what they need to prove, that only whites can be racist, and tailor the definition of power accordingly. While there is not enough room here to extensively cover the derivation, at the core of the argument is the claim that only whites have power. Thus, for these scholars, an Arab state that degrades black people is not an abuse of power, as such a state falls under the border of influence of the white Western hegemony, and minorities, even the wealthiest and or most politically connected, still remain powerless as white people establish the system within which they operate. Not only do such notions of power conflict with intuition, but this linkage of power and white is fundamentally flawed. While the history and current state of white supremacy and white privilege should not be ignored, we should not dismiss inter-minority relations as either being powerless or emanating from the white power structure. This is especially true with foreign nations. Although our world is now linked in many complex ways, there was a time when white people did not exert influence over other societies. Non-white groups were at the helms of power in such societies, and it stands to reason that remnants of these power structures remain in place today. Furthermore, while in the United States whites may have more power than minorities, it is obvious that whites do not control all levers of power. A black man is in the Oval Office, 2 minorities are serving on the Supreme Court, and roughly 1/5 of Fortune 500 CEOs are members of the racial minority groups. A poor white man in Wisconsin who detests Asians, or a black president who wishes to stop Asian immigration because he perceives Asians as, say, unfit to be Americans. If we subscribe to the position that only white people can be racist, it necessarily follows that the Wisconsinite has more power than the black president. This, however, is absurd. The black president has power and is fully capable of being racist. I know it's difficult to make snap decisions about thoughts that you might have founded years ago, but I hope that I've at least made you endeavor to think about racism more critically, as something that's more complex than black and white. See what I did there? Anyway, thank you as always, and have a great day. Signing off, Method.